the nicest subject.
Although they're connected somehow.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the, I would say, the more interesting plenary session of this conference. Now, this session will be quite interesting because the people that are sitting with me are not at all experts of Inspire, are never involved in Inspire, so what they will say will be a completely different view of what we listen so far. This session will start with 5 presentations. With 5 presentations, with a panel that is representing different typologies of stakeholders, and where I have to point this? It's green, but it's not green. I tried the other one. It's the green one. So to change this? Okay, so. Oh, okay. So I have not the right of the speaker, so. Next slide, please. Okay, the first speaker is Celina Ramjoue. She's the Deputy Head of Unit of the European Commission DigiConnect services, and in particular, she's working on the Data Innovation and Policy Unit. That is the unit that is responsible for, among others, for the Public Sector Information Directive. And she will represent in the panel, she will play in the panel the role of the policymaker. The next, please. Then we have Timo Koskimäki is a representative of the public sector, providers and users. He's a Deputy Director General of Statistic Production Statistic in Statistics Finland. The next. Then we have Frank Kresin is representing the academic research and innovation sectors. Frank is also Managing Director of the Designlab at the University of Twente. The next. Then we move to the private sector, and we start with an added value data providers. Frederic Pivetta is a managing partner of Dalberg Data Insight. The next. And then we will finish with Abayomi, correct? That is representing the private sector. I classify him as a data producer and users. He will clearly speak about data produced by CAR, being the corporate and government affairs representative office of the European Union, or BMW. The next. This plenary, as you have seen in the program, aim to see how the current data infrastructures need to evolve in the future to facilitate the data exchange between the public and the private sectors, and as well with considering information coming from citizens and for citizens. The next. I ask my panelists to address these 4 questions. And the first question is mainly dealing with the importance of data that are not under the responsibility of, directly responsibility of public sector administrations. So data collected by the private sector, but as well data collected by citizens. Which is the importance of this data? Which data are more important, in particular for public good? And the second question is about the legislation. Do we have a legislation that is allowing us to ensure that this data will be accessible to public authorities and for, in particular, again, for critical businesses? The third question is, imagine that this information will be accessible, which are the emerging business models. So are still dealing with the traditional license approach? Are there partnership emergence? Is the concept of private-public partnership still valid? I would like also to see something about how this is happening according to the experience that are already addressed by the panelists. The final question is about more on the technicality. Imagine that there is a way to share the data between public, private, and citizens, which are the technical issues that need to be addressed. So how we can ensure that the existing public data infrastructure will be able in the future to connect and to use data collected by the private and sector and by the citizens. These are the 4 questions. Next. And I already informed the panelists if they will not be able to answer the question, I will ask the question again. And if time remaining, I will allow you to ask questions to the panelists at the end of their presentation. I hope that we will be able to stay until in the time that is foreseen. And so if you have some questions, be prepared to formulate them at the end of the presentations. So I will start now inviting Celina to start presenting what the European Commission is doing in terms of new policies.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. So I get the speakers right, meaning I can use this. Okay, wonderful. So thank you very, very much for this opportunity to be here. I'm very excited. And I'm also relieved to hear that I'm not the only one who's not very much acquainted with Inspire. Nevertheless, I hope I can bring something in the sense that, so as you heard, I work for the European Commission. I work for a unit that deals with data policy in a horizontal way. And so we look at different instruments that exist, and we try to improve them. And in this phase, we're also trying to bring them together in a sense. So what I hope to do today is give you an overview of what exists and hopefully inspire you in a sense that I would like to make you think about where Inspire fits in, and you can inspire me about what Inspire can do for the rest of the framework. So, yes, that works. Okay, so the way I would like to do this is to briefly say a few words about why we do this work, so the potential of data in general. Then I will talk a little bit about the digital single market strategy, which I suppose most of you have heard of. That's our overarching framework for what we do on data. And then what I'll do is go through European policies on data that exist of different types. So I'll talk very briefly about personal data regulation, which is also kind of framework. And then I'll go through 3 types of data: government, public sector type data, research data, industry-held data. And then I will talk about next steps and bringing all this together. So the potential of data, or why do we do all of this? I know I don't need to say a lot about this because I think this type of audience is convinced of the potential of data. There are really 2 main reasons we work on exploiting, on making the best use of data. One is the huge range of societal benefits we can draw from data. So I've listed a few areas on this slide: health, environment, agriculture, mobility, research. So it's really the broadest goals, or the most incredible goals, like living longer, I would say, to things like being able to pick the movie you see this evening at the cinema in an efficient way. So it's really all sorts of ways to improve citizens' life. And then connected with that, of course, is economic growth. And that's really been a focus, I would say, of the digital single market strategy. And this is why we've devoted quite some work to seeing what it really means in terms of figures to work, to exploit data properly. So we commissioned a study to IDC, the International Data Consortium. And what this study shows is that so what they do is they paint 3 scenarios of what could happen with the use of data. The baseline scenario on the right of the slide in the middle is basically if we continue as we are doing now, we don't take any special measures, the economic situation is as it is today. We're at a situation where the data economy will be worth about 2.6% of GDP in 2020. We also have a challenge scenario in which things remain as today, but also the economy doesn't go very well. There still would be growth, but a bit less. Now, at the top of the slide on the right, you see the high growth scenario. And if we put in place regulatory measures that are beneficial to the data economy, we could reach a situation, according to this study, where we have a data economy worth 4% of GDP, 739 billion euros. Now, there are many different studies. Basically, and you can discuss methodology precisely, but basically all studies show that these are big numbers. These are not peanuts. It's not coffee money. So it's really worth investing in the data economy. Now, moving to our global policy framework, not only on the data economy, but on digital things in general, the Digital Single Market Strategy, DSM, as people call it, adopted 2015 with the present Commission. It basically works to ensure that Europe's economy, industry, and employment take full advantage of what all things digital can offer. So there are many different chapters, which you see listed on this slide, and there's one section, one chapter on the data economy. And we're very lucky to have commissioners that support our work very much. So we have one vice president of the commission right now, Andrus Ansip. He's Estonian, so he's used to all things digital. Estonians are very good at e-government and so on. So he thinks that data should flow freely across borders. That's one of his big things, and he really supports the data economy very much. And then we have a new arrival, Bulgarian Commissioner Maria Gabriel. She just started a few months ago. And she already, though, also has shown a great support. So she said that data lies at the core of the fourth industrial revolution, and that it's an essential resource for economic growth, competitiveness, innovation, creation, and society's progress in general. She underlines very much the societal dimension. So we have support from the upper level, which is always useful. But then, of course, we have to do the real work. So here, now I want to go through policies we have on different types of data. And I begin with data protection rules. I could have put this also as a general frame, because it really is what we could call a foundation of all other data policies we have. In a sense, it comes first. So as you know, there's the General Data Protection Regulation, which will come into force in May of next year. And, as the title says, its main thrust is to protect personal data. That's really the underlying logic. However, having this kind of regulation also actually makes data usable in that if personal data is anonymized, it can be used for other things like non-personal data. Similarly, there's a consent mechanism described. Any transfer of data, of personal data outside the EU is subject to the same level of protection as inside the EU. So that's, again, very much in the protection logic. And then in the GDPR, there is a right to portability of personal data. So again, you see many mechanisms that actually make personal data flow and usable. And what you see is that there's nothing similar for non-personal data. So I would say this is a foundation. Everything that we do on facilitating the data economy, of course, follows GDPR and there are previous data protection rules that exist now. That comes first, and everything we do comes. Now I move on to the 3 types of data. So it's government, research, and industry-held data. I also sometimes like to term them the .gov, .edu, and .com data to sort of clarify what I'm talking about. So I start with government data. So I'm talking about government-held data, public sector information, Inspire-type data, but not only spatial data. So the main instrument we have here is the Public Sector Information Directive. It's a directive of 2003 that was already amended once in 2013. And the underlying logic of this directive is basically publicly funded information, public sector information should be reusable in an open manner. This is the thrust of the directive. So it has a minimal set of rules on fair competition and transparency. It has requirements that ensure that public sector information can be reused across sectors. And very importantly, it promotes reuse for commercial and non-commercial purposes, both. That's very important. Through this directive, public bodies are obliged to be transparent on the conditions for reuse. They need to avoid discrimination between reusers. They have to address reuse applications within a time limit. In principle, they shouldn't enter into exclusive arrangements, and charges should be limited. So basically, the directive puts in place some rules about making reuse possible. What's interesting about this instrument is it began as kind of more of a competition instrument. And then over the years, it developed into more of an open data instrument, as the idea of open data has become more mainstream. So that's our main instrument for government type data. There's an infrastructure to support this. The European Data Portal, which federates national data portals. There's an EU-level data portal, the Open Data Portal. And I know there's a link to the Inspire portal. So infrastructure supports our policy. Now, this directive, already reviewed once, is up for review again. So the directive itself says July 2018. And then in addition to that, we've been pushed to actually do this quite quickly via the midterm review of the Digital Single Market Strategy. I'll come back to that in the end. So what's going to happen now is that we're going to take a close look at this directive and see how we can push further, how we can open it up further, how we can maybe enlarge the scope, how we can make it stronger, in essence. That's really what we're going to be looking at. This will be a process that will go until spring 2018. That's what's planned anyway. There will be a public online consultation, and we're going to launch quite a large study which will look at a number of sub-areas, either of the directive or which we feel could be addressed in the directive, which aren't yet. And those include reuse of cultural heritage materials, functional charging provisions, interplay of personal data protection and reuse, reuse of data held by public undertakings. So this is interesting. This goes into the question of privately held data. This is data held, for example, by companies that have concessions from a public body, transport, waste, this kind of thing. Reuse of research data, which is excluded now from the scope of the directive. And then more technical issues like improving discoverability, machine readability, better use of dynamic data, because there's really been a development over the lifetime of the directive that data really is dynamic now, more and more, sensor data, this type of thing, and how to actually make sure that this is exploited better. This can be addressed in the directive. And then, last but certainly not least, a clarification also of the interplay with Inspire. So all these areas will be looked at over the next months. And yes, we're starting the process, so it should be interesting. Now I move on to research data, the .edu type data, which, like government type data, is also a result of public funding. So there's a strong link there. Now the rationale, the underlying rationale for our work, the Commission's work on research data, is the open science paradigm, which has become very strong over the last years. And the idea here, much like open data, is that, well, first of all, open science, opening up science, meaning opening up all phases of the research cycle from project design to evaluation to publication of results, publication of data underlying publications, and so on. All this should become open. So the underlying idea is that that's good for science, first of all. Then it's good for the economy in the sense that whatever comes out of science can be used not only by science, but also by others, for example, by businesses, especially SMEs that might not have access in other ways to this kind of data. And then there's a trickle-down effect to society in general. And not only a trickle-down effect, it's also a question of trust. If you know on what kind of scientific evidence governments are basing their decisions, if you know how the scientific process feeds into decision-making, that's positive for trust in government and in science. So there's the good for society aspect, and here I wanted to bring up citizen science also, because that was one of the issues addressed, and I don't have a separate slide on it, but I think this is a good place to address it. Citizen science, and so links very much to the data produced by citizen scientists, and clearly this is a new source of data. And it's a new way to open science, but it's also a new way to open the process of deciding what kind of research is funded, and so on. So it's kind of a give and take between society and science. It's a triangular, positive relationship between science, society, and governments. So yes, I think that citizen science is important. Citizen data as a new source of data is extremely important because it's data that you can't get in any other way, basically. But I know there'll be much more in-depth treatment of that topic. So that's the rationale for working on research data. Now, very quickly, what is done at the level of the European Commission on research data? There's a recommendation from 2012 on access to and preservation of scientific information. There's also an open research data pilot in Horizon 2020 in which grantees, so those who receive funding through our framework program, need to provide open access to research data resulting from their projects and also need to deposit data. Then the principle of fair research data, so fair meaning findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, has pretty much established itself in EU policymaking in this field. And the importance of data management. So it's not just opening up data in science, it's also knowing what's there, how to get at it, how to find it, how to use it. I mean, I think that these are topics that you must discuss very much. Okay, another topic is the European Open Science Cloud. This was announced a year ago, the European Cloud Initiative 2016. So this is the infrastructure planned for research data. And so you see already there are kind of different infrastructures in different areas. You have the open data infrastructure, here you have the open science infrastructure. So for me, looking at things horizontally already, it makes me wonder if one couldn't put them together. But so I flag that already. I wanted to mention text and data mining, because this is dealt with in a completely different place, which is copyright, the copyright framework. Basically, what is being discussed is an exception from the current framework, an exception for researchers to be able to text and data mine content, for example, scientific publications, data, for all sorts of purposes, not just research purposes. So it's based on the beneficiaries can mine. This is something being discussed now, and again, this is going beyond the big policy declarations of we should be able to do all this. It's actually how do you do it, because you need to be able to actually mine information that exists, and it's using the tools that exist now. So that's ongoing. The copyright reform is being discussed. A very long process. Okay, now the last type of data that I wanted to address is industry-held data. And this is not publicly funded data, so that makes it quite different. And it's the kind of data that the Commission hadn't done anything really about up to this year. So we adopted in January of this year a communication called Building a European Data Economy. And this underlines the need to exploit industry-held data better. So something new we had never looked at. We focus here on non-personal and machine-generated data. I say focus because we don't exclude personal data, because it's very difficult to actually divide personal and non-personal data in the data economy. We focus on machine-generated data because that's kind of data that simply had never been looked at before, and never existed before. In these, so think your smartphone, think sensor data on weather, this kind of thing. So data being generated all the time in massive amounts, and nobody really, there were no rules on who owns that data and who can do what with it, but it's data that's very interesting for many people for different reasons. So this is the data that we're looking at in this communication. What happens with this data today is that if it's reused or given to others, what happens is that it's done via contracts. So typically, a company will hold the data. It doesn't mean it really owns it, because there's a lot of this data that yes, there's no clear ownership legally, but it holds it de facto. And through contracts, this data will be given across, down the value chain, typically. This is suboptimal, because we don't know what kind of data is out there, and many, for example, small companies that might be interested in using this data, for example, to create an application or something like that, or service, they don't even know that this data exists. Also, if you negotiate a contract with a company, a large company, that can be very difficult, because you can't compare with other contracts, so there's a lack of transparency on the conditions under which you get access to this kind of data. So what we have is a situation in which we have data silos, or we have data sharing but in a not very transparent manner. So our objective is to facilitate business-to-business data sharing and trading. And so the communication talks about that, basically. It goes into other issues also, but this is really what I want to focus on in this context. Also, there's a mention of infrastructure. So here too, industrial data platforms are the approach taken for sharing business-type data. But as I think I've tried to underline, it's not easy, this area, simply because for us as a policymaker. It's not easy because this is privately held data. So we did a stakeholder dialogue. So we launched this in January, and then we did a long public consultation and stakeholder dialogue, meaning workshops and meetings and what have you, until April. And what comes out is that, and I'll focus again on the data sharing, because I think that's the most interesting in this for this audience. A majority of respondents, and a lot of them were businesses, but not only, say that access to data is indeed difficult, and it would be better for the economy if there were better access. At the same time, they don't want legislation on this at all. But they like the idea of kind of soft solutions. So technical guidance, guidelines of some sort, nothing hard. development of model contracts, that would also be a solution. So this is really the big message that came out for industry-held data. Go slow, facilitate, but no directive. That was clear. Yeah, other topics addressed were liability in connection with data. So, you know, what about new products, new data-driven products? For example, a smart car, who's liable if there's an accident? These kinds of issues were also addressed, but those are not only linked to data. So this was on industry data. Now, I go to another topic that Alessandro emphasized, and that's access to privately held data of public interest, what we also sometimes like to call reverse PSI. And this was addressed in one line in our communication, and this is something that we see that there really is a lot of interest in, and there might be a lot of potential. So the concept, to make it clear again, is access to commercially or privately held data that has some public or general interest. For example, health data, statistical data, multimodal transport services, etc. So basically the idea is if there's some specific need of the public sector, then there could be a rationale to access privately held data. The question is how to do this. So there are different models. I've put here, there's the one-to-one scenario, that's the reverse PSI scenario. So that is the public sector accesses specific privately held data for a specific reason. Or there's the one-to-many model, where data becomes reusable openly or for hopefully not too excessive price. So that would be when data becomes available on the market, basically, that's otherwise locked up. And also, this kind of data is important for science, always to be emphasized. We had a workshop on this, and I would say we're really at the beginning of a reflection. We see a lot of interest. We see a lot of interest from statistics offices, and we have a speaker on that also. The French have already a law, Loi Le Maire, where they have this kind of, they have an article on exactly this concept. So it's something in the making, I would say. We think it's definitely something to explore, but we also see that it's difficult because it's privately held data. Also, we see that companies are actually quite active on a case-by-case ad hoc basis. So it's not as if nothing were happening. It's also a question of taking stock, I would say, and seeing what's going on and doing things slowly. That's our impression in this area. So now, I get to my conclusion, bringing it all together and next steps. We're convinced that the data economy will flourish if data is accessible and reusable across borders, for and by different types of organizations, private, public, research organizations, for and by different sectors, energy, manufacturing, health, etc., etc., etc. The list is very long. So the approach is that having a large reservoir of data available for reuse for all will make it possible to build new services, will allow for searching and for finding new patterns, and will enable the emergence of ideas and answers to societal challenges. So for example, take the case of epidemics. You have an epidemic. Now, the different kinds of data that you can use to address that, well, there are a lot of different kinds, and bringing them together is really forceful. So, you have data on the disease itself. That's, I would say, classic research data. Then you have data, say, from hospitals, where you see what's actually going on in the hospital, how the disease develops in a clinical case. And then, if you add on top of that, mobile phone data, so you can localize where the epidemic is. If you put all that together, then you really have a good chance of doing something against an epidemic quickly, effectively, and having real success. So that's one example of how this pooling of data of different types and removing all the borders might actually make a big difference. So it needs to be legally and technically possible, not only to access and reuse, but also to blend and combine data and tools. That is really our vision, I would say. And this is the same thing in an easy visual. So business data, government data, and scientific data, all this should come together to facilitate innovation and growth and solutions to societal challenges. And how do we proceed with this in terms of tools? So I mentioned the DSM before, and now we've had the DSM midterm review in May. We have a chapter on the data economy, and we have actions that are announced. So for autumn, so now basically, we have a legislative proposal announced on the free flow of data across borders. I specify that it's a specific issue. This is, and I haven't focused on this in this talk, it's the, I would say, the data being caught within national rules that prohibit flow across borders. This is typically tax data, health data, this kind of thing. So this is it's a specific area which I haven't focused on. There should be regulation coming out very soon. The second agenda point, and this is the one that's the most relevant in this context, is an initiative on accessibility and reuse of public and publicly funded data, and to further explore the issue of privately held data which are of public interest. So that's the reverse PSI. And this action foreseen for spring of next year, so that's the review of the PSI directive, but not only. It's also looking at other instruments that we have in some of the fields that I've mentioned. So on research information, there's work going on. Also, I didn't mention, but there's the database directive also to look at. So to look at what we have and see if we could not have a kind of a package that pushes in the sense that I've just tried to outline, the reservoir, bringing it all together. And then the DSM midterm review also says that we'll continue working on liability. Again, I didn't emphasize that, but that's also a big topic in the data context. And then continue to assess the need for work on B2B data sharing also. And I think that was the end. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Celina. It has been a long, but I think that a very informative presentation. So that is giving, I think, a clear picture of how many policy issues are on the table today, and how it's difficult to deal with all these policy issues at the same time. But the Commission is clearly engaged to ensure that in the future open access to data will be really open as much as possible. Now I would like to give the floor to Timo, that we start expressing some experience on access to the data.
Yes, thank you for invitation. It's been really interesting to be around here in this seminar, and it's a pleasure to give you my impressions on the topic. My title is Platform Economy, Digitalization and Official Statistics, Need for New Societal Tools. It's more or less a practical example of what Celina just described on the, let's say, political level, story about how we as statisticians access our data today, why we use data and how we get access to it. Then a story about what has changed since our traditional ways of dealing with data and producing the statistics were established. And finally, some examples what happened when we in Finland tried to get access to these emerging new data sources and also some suggestions for the way forward. Statistician in this title could actually be replaced by any producing data for planning purposes, policy evaluation, etc. So it's not entirely statistical business, although it's for me convenient to speak it from the official statistics point of view. So where do we stand now? The essential element from the point of view of this panel is that we rely on bilateral arrangements and direct collection. Bilateral arrangements means that when we collect data, we usually get it from a single enterprise concerning that enterprise's data, or when we collect it from households, we agree with the contact person that they are willing to give us the data. We have a sort of professional or institutional promise in official statistics. You will find a similar type of statement in most professions, and for a number of other institutions, the research community is perhaps the evident comparison. So our task, what we promise, is we'll help you understand how things are in society, and naturally we do that by producing high quality statistics and data sets. And when we do that, we promise that we will be honest, transparent, professional, impartial, and things like that. And perhaps we give to our stakeholders or data providers that we will not harm you or your business when you give us data. That's the, let's say, the maxim we live up to. And what we ask in response to these promises, we ask the person or the enterprise we are in contact with to provide us data on their activities. We have in use two types of so-called societal tools. When dealing with individuals and households, we often use consent. So when we are contacting individual persons, we are asking for permission or asking their consent to provide answers to our questions, and in the same context we also ask them permission to merge their data with administrative data that we have access to. Whereas for enterprises, we typically utilize legal acts that stipulate that the enterprises are obliged to give us data. But also there we hold the promise that the data they give for statistics will not be used to harm them. There's one additional case, which is public sector data sharing. It's also based on legislation, so statistics in Finland, statistical office in Finland has access to practically all public sector register data, and more or less 95% on our statistical data we release is based on data collected by other administrations. So it's a peculiarity, but not the topic of this speech. What's happening in the world that makes our traditional way of doing things a bit problematic, or at least ineffective? It's about platform economy and digitalization, very general terms. That's a very common picture used to describe sharing economy or digital economy, and you have three sort of actors in this picture. You have the owners of the assets, or you could also replace that word by a traditional producer, some enterprise providing something for the markets, goods or services. You have, in this graph, the role is called seeker, but it could be replaced as customer or something like that, user of the goods or services or things like that. And then in this picture we have a platform which refers now to ways these owners and seekers, producers and customers interact. And of course we are now thinking the platform as something digital. From our point of view as statisticians, any traditional business can be seen as a form of platform economy. So there's no big difference. You find this kind of structures already before the digital revolution. We used to call the platform perhaps wholesaler, outlet, things like that. They were performing exactly the same thing as platform here. The new thing is that everything is getting now digital, and the platform is emerging as a kind of hub for all the information on producers, customers, owners, seekers, whatever you like. And all the data we traditionally have collected from the producer or owner or seeker or customer could be actually derived from the platform in a digital format, and that would be very, very effective. There are different types of platforms, technical platforms, the sketch of a mobile phone system. There you also see a kind of hub where you could access the data on all actors using mobile phones in this case. Or the third example, financial platforms. This is a scheme about credit card payment network, where you also see kind of hub in the middle, where more or less not all the data that's contained in the transaction level, but most of that data would be available. So we have platforms, and compared to the number of consumers or producers, the number of platforms is limited. You will not see too many financial platforms. You won't see too many mobile network operators. You won't see too many marketplaces on the net. Perhaps there are many, but not as many as we used to have before the physical outlets. Okay, so there's a platform, and we know that getting access to that platform would enable us to do our job much better and much easier, and with much more quality if we would get that. The key word in this title is perhaps the data on third parties. That's the key difference as compared to our traditional way, where we deal directly with consumers, directly with enterprises. When dealing with platforms, we are dealing with third-party data. So we are asking the platform owners, so to say, to provide us data concerning their customers or their customers' customers. And that is, I think, on the most general level, the reason why this business is a bit tricky business. I mean, getting access to privately held data. What we did get access to those platforms, that's Finland. We managed to initiate a revision process for our National Statistical Act. It's naturally not our task to revise legislation, but we persuaded our Ministry of Finance to undertake the approach, and the National Statistics Act was opened for discussion, and there was preparatory work for that. What we as Stats Finland did, perhaps this time in a bigger scale than in earlier revisions of Stats Act, we very actively lobbied the stakeholders of statistics. We called the thing the roadshow. It consisted of presenting our main arguments. Why would we have to revise the Statistics Act? And we promised them all good things that we are able to promise as statisticians. We promised we would produce better statistics. We would produce statistics that would be suited and tailored for you as a data provider. We promised that all the data security issues and things like that are very well taken care of, and they also apply to these new kinds of data. We actually even provided to pay costs to companies associated with the ICT interfaces they would be needed to set up for us. So we really had a mission and we had promises. In practice, we met with this lobbying round about 15 branch organizations and representatives of bigger companies in Finland. That's quite a good coverage because we are a small economy. And the typical team from Stats Finland doing this lobbying was Director General, Deputy Director General, that would be me, and then another director, which was familiar with the field of the branch organization. That was nice, and we were well met by the CEOs and other important. The big private companies got a lot of coffee and tasty sandwiches and things like that. Unfortunately, and they were in principle very positive to our ideas, and they did understand our view, and they did appreciate that we promised better statistics. And actually, we also promised them less response burden, because this would be more or less automated, the whole statistical business, if we get access to their data. Or not only access to their data, the other option we provided, that we could provide you an algorithm that you could use in your own data warehouse to produce us the data. So it was, we actually didn't want all the massive amounts of data they have. We would more or less like to have some more aggregated things. But the legal process didn't go further. There was kind of inherent consensus required with the stakeholders, and there was always someone that disagreed on our proposals. To be honest, in most cases it was the financial industry which was reluctant. And so the drafting of the legislation was not realized, or redrafting. What happened that we then continued on a voluntary basis with those bigger companies and managed to get access to some test data sets, managed to provide algorithms for a couple of mobile phone operators that they used for us, managed to establish 2 real live production data flows, but that was far less than we expected, and actually we are not sure whether that will improve our actions. These are the final slides. It seems to be that the issue with the stakeholders we discussed was about trust. They were in principle very favorable to our ideas, but they were unsure whether they would be faced by a public discussion when it comes known that they are providing their data for statistics or public sector, and they were in a way afraid that we would spoil all of the operating environment because of our new data requirements. So they were concerned, and we were not able to answer to them their concerns in a satisfactory manner. So we, in a way, have to assume a much broader responsibility for what we do as compared to these bilateral agreements where everything was clear and easy. So my conclusions here are, the legislation is somewhat ambitious on the third-party data and platforms. There's no clear rules, and if there are rules, they are scattered around in different legal acts, and it's really difficult for the companies and even for us to be aware which rules should apply in a given situation. The negotiations with platform owners were also challenging, partly due to the ambiguities in the legislation. They were not sure about what their rights are. Perhaps there's a bit improvement on this with the new Personal Data Protection Act, which will be enforced next spring. But the enterprise sector is still lacking any harmonized or common legislation where we could refer to one single act, which would be very convenient. So we would need new legislation, both to get access to data in those areas where we really want it to be mandatory, and also to facilitate contractual arrangements. That's my message today. Thank you.
Thank you, Timo. I think that your presentation confirmed that there is a need for some European legislation in this matter. And it will not be easy. So now I will ask Frank to refresh and to present something more innovative, more positive, because otherwise the audience will be depressed.
Okay, no high hopes here. Thank you for having me. I'm Frank. I will talk about citizen science. My background is twofold. I'm the managing director of the Designlab at the University of Twente, but also the former research director for an organization called Waag Society, which is an independent media lab in Amsterdam. And my work that I present here is based on both contexts. So first of all, how open are we in citizen science? Who of you has experience with citizen science? Maybe you can show hands. A few, yeah, more. And then maybe you recognize this problem in a way that most people, when they do citizen science, they focus on the data acquisition, maybe the interpretation part, but not so much on problem definition, research strategy, tools and sensors, and the action part. Because very often academia asks people to help them with their... I would like to make a claim that we should do different the other way around. We should ask people what they want, and we should help them achieve that. And I think we can get to much better results. I will do so on behalf of a project that I'm closely related to, that is about urban environmental challenges. It's air quality, sound pollution, water, it's maybe soil. And as you probably know, this is a big problem in our societies. And it's so big that it has all kinds of effects on our bodies, even on our reproductive systems. It means that, well, we see that with every document that the World Health Organization is producing on this issue, that even lower levels of pollution lead to higher effects. So this is something that we should really care about. And a relatively clean country like the Netherlands even has its citizens live 13 months shorter on average. So we miss 13 healthy years, no, months, sorry. Years will be, just to check if you're awake. Months, thank you, because of air pollution alone. So this is a serious issue. And that's why organizations like the National Institute for Public Health in every country, they've started to set up these kind of very big sensors that are expensive to run, and consequently, there are just a few of them. So this is the map of these sensors in Holland. It's slightly under 100. And you see that if you live in Amsterdam, where probably a lot of you have been, then you're kind of well off. But if you're in Friesland or Groningen, then there's maybe one measurement. So it really doesn't help you, especially because air pollution is changing very much based on street to street, on square to square. So your personal pollution might differ a lot. So there, citizen science can be really of help. So what we try to do is see if people are really interested in well, producing more data that they interpret themselves, but also other people can interpret. We have been inspired by projects like these. I don't know if you're aware of Safecast. Any people know the Safecast already? It's a very interesting project that started after the Fukushima disaster in Japan in 2011, when the tsunami hit the country, and then there was a lot of radiation coming out of the Fukushima Daiichi plant. And because there was not enough data at that point in time, some people themselves, they started to measure things. They started to make the sensors, they built a group, and they still exist. And their data was so accurate that it was used by the Japanese government to inform their citizens where they should or where they could not be. So this is really interesting. This is a totally different example. It's the Air Basin project. Anybody from Antwerp, maybe? Maybe you know the Air Basin project, you might. It's now in its third year, and it's by a professor from the Ghent University who started this using strawberry plants, literally strawberry plants, ask people to put them in their windowsills, and then based on the pollution will then be on the leaves. And when they analyze the leaves thereafter, so people cut the leaves, they send them in, they're analyzed, and then they made a very highly accurate map of air pollution in Antwerp for over a few years. And also this was used in the local not the courts, but in the, how do you say that, Hotel de Ville, something like that, to make sure that somewhere regulation was changed. So this is good as well. And based on these examples, in Amsterdam, now 3 years ago, we started the Smart Citizens Lab. Smart Citizen is a direct reference to the smart city, of course, because I think you cannot have smart cities without smart citizens taking actions themselves. So we reached out to people. First of all, we reached out to organizations to help us. Because if one thing is clear, citizen science is about ecosystems. It's about people teaming their efforts, teaming their data, also their questions, and coming together to understand a certain topic. And before long, we had a lot of organizations helping us, both nationally, both also in Amsterdam itself, and also on the European scale. What we wanted to do is empower people to acquire, read, and manipulate data, thereby understanding their environments better, turning that data that they collect into some kind of action and insight, and all of this using public networks of low-cost open-source sensors. We do this because we think it will result in better informed and more engaged citizens, have more impactful dialogues, well, those are probably the most important, I think, more data, and we hope this will finally lead to better, more enjoyable cities, and I think it will. First, we reached out. We reached out to people and we asked them if they would be interested in becoming citizen scientists. And this was actually fairly simple. A lot of people applied. Many people were interested, of course, in the environment, but also in technology and in participation. And they came up to us and we asked them what they want to do. We then taught them a lot of methods. And these methods, there's a lot of very complicated methodologies, but also very simple methodologies that can sometimes give fairly accurate or accurate enough data. And we worked them out together. On the right side, you see a small snake that was hovering in the canals, collecting water quality from while it was hovering there. And there's a lot of ways in which you can do this. We also helped them to make their own sensors. And I think this is key because it's not just using their predefined stuff, but it's actually empowering people to take matters in their own hand and have them build their own technologies or at least adapt their technologies. And when we biked around with this sensor on the back of the bike, we had to cover it a little bit because some people thought it was a bomb on the bike. So that's why we had the big Waag Society NO2 sensor, and then people were kind of relaxed again. This led, of course, to a lot of data that we then helped people visualize. And this is a second, I think, crucial step. It's not only helping people to collect data, but very much helping them to understand and to get answers to their questions. So we did so extensively, and that led to maps. And all of this was done in a very participatory way, in which we invited experts, we gave our answers, but also our questions and our doubts. And by this, many new collaborations between, for example, the National Institute for Public Health and these citizens came about. And now this National Institute has its first citizen science lab as well in the Netherlands. We made a kind of 7-step procedure that is now followed in a few cities around the world. It's helping people to meet, matching them up, map the problems, make some sensors, measure the environment, master the data, and finally mobilize based on what is the outcome. And you can read of it, of course, if you want. And I think the biggest outcome was this European project called Making Sense, that I'm the principal investigator of, and lessons from Amsterdam. Years, and we brought that to Kosovo, a very important and highly polluted area. I don't know if some people are from Kosovo here by chance. Well, if you go there, you'll really notice that the air is extremely bad. And we've had a lot of youngsters, especially youngsters, going every day, twice daily, around highly polluted places to collect data and try to understand, and finally also successfully influence public policy, leading to the first regulation on air quality that there was in Kosovo. We worked with community champions in Barcelona. We are still doing so. They have a lot of a sound problem, of course, and we help them to understand and become valid citizen scientists that we hope will continue after the project. And of course, in Amsterdam, where it started, we worked with several organizations on the 3 most polluted streets. And that it can actually have a big impact was shown just today when a similar citizen science project led to judges in the Netherlands forced the national government to take action and really make sure that pollution levels are going down very quickly. So this was just in the news. I don't know if anybody of you can read Dutch, but I was highly impressed with what happened just today. So bring this all back to inspire and maybe answer some of your questions. Why should we do this and what should we do? Well, I think if we go forward, we need to enhance people's data literacy skills. This means that when we have all this data, and when I hear Celine and also Timo, that we'll have more and more and more of this data available, we cannot live in a situation where most of the population really has totally no clue on what they mean. They cannot tell if it's right, if it's wrong, if it's going up, if it's going down, and also not what it means. So we need to invest a lot in enhancing these data literacy skills. The second is, I think we should develop a public and free data commons. Also, when I listen to Celine, it's very insightful. The second slide is about monetary value. The first one is about the public value. The second is about monetary value that will be increasingly high. But I think this public value is much more important, and we should have more slides telling us what could happen if we have a public data commons instead of a public data market. Then, of course, we have to provide technically tools for calibration and linking and also mesh networks. So these citizen science data sets, they're typically not well calibrated. There's not this super strict protocol behind it. They might vary from day to day. The sensors might change over time. So we have a very interesting technical challenge, is how to automatically calibrate all that messy data when it comes online and try to make value or make something out of it. And if you can do so, you'll help a lot of citizen science projects. Well, then, of course, we have to reach out and listen to these communities. So not just first think, then go, and then listen, but no, listen first, and then see what you can do and how you can help these communities, and they will be able to help you. And then finally, I think this abstract theme of data could be packaged in the forms of campaigns. So if you have a campaign for better health, for better air, for better water, for better what, then you will allow many more people to join these citizen science projects as well. So what we did in Amsterdam is we allowed people to make their own sensors. Actually, that is for the happy few that really take the time and effort to get there. But we can, like when you use strawberry plants, you can use much, much, much more people. And I think we should set out to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Timo, for giving a more optimistic and positive view. I share your comment about automatic calibration. This is something which just is also working, that is recognized as one of the key issues to be able to use this data at the same level of quality than traditional measuring station. Now I will ask Frederic to present what we can do if we have the data.
Which one should I use? Menu?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay, that's okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Or good evening. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. So First of all, you probably don't know me and what I'm doing, so maybe let me explain you what I'm doing. So basically, I'm an entrepreneur. I founded my first, I have an academic background, but I founded my first company 7 or 8 years ago now, doing big data for telecom operators in emerging countries. Why emerging countries? Because it's easier than in major countries. Why telecom? Because basically they have a lot of data. And so the idea was very simple. We wanted to help the telecom operators by developing big data tools to increase the market share and the profit. Very private sector oriented. I would say 4 or 5 years ago, I started working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on multiple topics around financial inclusion, gender, etc. And I thought maybe we can use the telecom data to basically have insights on the people and solve social questions, address social questions. And so basically what I did was very simple. I'm still a very happy shareholder of my first company, but I created another company focusing only on social impact and big data. So that's what we do. We use data from the private sector and we address social questions for governments, NGOs, foundations, international organizations, whoever has an interest and potentially money in social questions. And so now I'm part of Dalberg Group, which is a group of 400 people in the world. We are 500 people in the world. We are really global. We have offices mostly in emerging countries. But I'm based in Brussels. And so the idea is very simple, is that, as I said, the ideas are always very simple, by the way. We use multiple data sources. Here, this is probably the most boring slide that you're going to ever see. So I'm not going to go into the details, but basically what you can see here is that you have different types of data. You have telecom data, you have satellite data, you have drone data, you have many type of private sector data that we use. These data, depending on what they are, give us insights on different things. So, just as an example, telecom data. You have, every time you make a phone call, something is recorded somewhere. Every time your phone automatically checks whether you have an email, it's recorded somewhere. Every time you browse your phone on the internet, if you just check your email or just go on a website, it's recorded somewhere. So these are different types of data, and this helps to give answer to different types of questions. So for instance, every time you make a call, it's recorded somewhere. So basically, with this data, I know who are your friends, and I know whether you have a lot of friends or whether you are a very popular person. I know where you live, I know where you drive, I know where you work. I probably know a lot about your invoicing on phones because I know whether you're going to phone a lot or call a lot or not. So you see, with all these data, I can see and derive a lot of insights. Obviously, there's always a privacy question. To be honest, from my perspective, and because I'm very bullish, I think there is no issue with privacy doing that. And it's not only because I'm very bullish, it's because also we are very careful from a technical perspective. So, first of all, we bring the algorithm to the data. We don't take any data from outside the premises of the telecom operator, or all the data remains over there. And frankly, I don't want to get the data because the volumes are too large, the connections are too difficult, etc., etc. So we develop the algorithm and we send the algorithms to the data. That's one. Secondly, we aggregate the data. So basically, we almost person. I mean, I have no interest into that. And when there is a question about tracking individuals, I say, most of the time I say no. Sometimes I have an hesitation. And when I have an hesitation, it's because you would like to track all the people infected with tuberculosis in a country. For instance, in Pakistan, it's very important to know. Where have been these people been passing over the last weeks? So that you know where more or less you're going to have tuberculosis in Pakistan. The third element is that obviously we anonymize the data within the premises of the telecom operator. So when you do all these things, frankly, there's no issue with privacy anymore, at least to my perspective. You're always going to be able to track and to I would say, identify individual people if you put a lot of energy into that. But as I said, all the data remains with the telecom operator premises. So if it happens, it's because somebody could break in, basically, these premises. We also use satellite data for agricultural questions, for instance, agriculture questions, sorry. So that's the second biggest data sources that we have. But obviously these data sources give you different insights. As I said, the telco data are going to on the movements, on the social interactions. Satellite data are going to give you insights on the crops, on the fields, potentially on the houses, on the roads. So basically on assets, not on people. It's possible, but it's going to be difficult. What are the challenges? It's costly. I mean, more and more telecom operators and satellite operators already before realize that data have value. They have no clue about the value of the data at this stage. It's very difficult for them to put a pricing on that. And I understand that. Sometimes the pricing depends on who they are talking to. End users are difficult to engage, especially in emerging countries. It's always very difficult. Who is in charge of a traffic light in Kampala, in Uganda? Nobody really knows. I mean, we need to find that person within the administration of Kampala. Economic model need to be sustainable. I mean, so far, and some people already pointed that out, there's no real economically sustainable model now. I mean, don't expect that these data are going to be open for free. It's not going to happen. I mean, all these telcos and satellite operators need to invest to collect this data. So forget it. If you make it free, it's going to be aggregated data. It's going to be not really refreshed, etc., etc. So whenever there is value in the data, we need to put a price tag to that, and somebody has to pay. And frankly, a lot of people already pay for mosquito nets. Why don't you pay for data to eradicate malaria? That's what we do with the Gates Foundation, for instance. Matching supply and demand for funding is very complex at this stage. The thing is that we are at a very early stage. And to be very honest with you, I don't care about intellectual property. I'm very fond of opening all our algorithms. And by the way, we already do that. What we miss, and that's maybe one point for Alessandro about missing infrastructure, what we probably miss is a platform where we can put these open algorithms. Because so far, all my algorithms are really open, but somebody has to call me so that I can give it to them. So there is no real platform at this stage. The relations with existing stakeholders need to be defined. As I said, it's very complex. You have the funders, you have the end users, you have the data providers, you have me, and you have the citizens at the end. I mean, everybody needs to be remunerated or protected in a way or another, and it's not really defined. These are examples of what we do. We work in financial inclusion with the United Nations, smart cities, Inter-American Development Bank, also UN, public health. We also work in agriculture and SDGs. SDGs is a very broad name for what? For everything else, basically. Because I didn't have any place for anything else on the slide. So more seriously, whenever we work on gender, for instance, these SDGs. So you see, there are very complex questions that we can put under the SDGs, and it's very broad at this stage, but just to give you an example here, this is the whole value chain for coffee farmers in Uganda, for instance. The idea is very simple: how to increase the usage of mobile money of coffee farmers so that these people are financially included in the economic system. And they resist to shocks. I mean, because these people, whenever they have a climate change or whether there is a shock on the food chain, they're going to suffer a lot. Brazil, Zika. How to eradicate Zika in Brazil? Where is Zika going to spread? We have been working on that in São Paulo, in the region, in the province of São Paulo with the American government, with USAID. That's the same question. Where do people live? Where do they go in the morning, in the evening? We can go on a very granular level to see where they go and where they live and where they work. We can see also helping some countries, like we do that in Haiti with the Inter-American Development Bank and in Uganda with the United Nations and the Belgian government, on basically to know what should we change in terms of public infrastructure to reduce the traffic jams, to improve the public transportation. And here I have a very clear example of, at least to me it's very clear, where you have in the center of the circle, in the middle of the circle, you have like a roundabout. We changed the roundabout a bit. What is the impact on the flows of people in the morning, in the evening, at any moment in time, in terms of time lost in the traffic jams, or in terms of number of people going through that roundabout? That's the insight that you get, basically. You don't need to survey anymore. You just look at the telecom data from here. You have Airtel and MTN in Uganda. We aggregate these data, and basically that is the result. So that is the outcome, basically. And so we are testing that with the people of the municipality of Kampala, optimizing the public infrastructure in the country. Obviously, we can do that for every road. We do that for, by the way, they have been asking us to do that for 25 points in the city where they want to optimize things. Because Kampala is not that bad with traffic jams, but it's not that great neither. Another example is Haiti, where we need to optimize the public transportation system and also the road system. So basically, sometimes you are missing a link between two secondary cities. You don't know. You don't know, and you don't see that people don't go from one city to the other. I mean, you see if you survey, but you cannot survey to that scale sometimes, and you don't survey everywhere. This is just an example of, obviously, these are things that everybody knows, which is the usage of satellite imagery to identify the crops. But here we go one level deeper, at least, I would say two levels deeper. One is that we try to identify the crop yield, which means that on a real-time, not real-time, but near real-time basis, we can predict more or less, or we're starting being able to predict more or less the yield of a field, which is very insightful to know whether you're going to have enough food for the country or the region. And we mix that with telecom data, because telecom data gives you a very good idea about the transportation cost and distance between the fields and the markets. And by the way, we identify the market in the telecom data because we see people gathering every Sunday morning or every Saturday morning or every Tuesday morning. We see these economic activities. So you see, by seeing social movements and movement of populations and linking that to satellite imagery, we aim at predicting with FAO, so the Food and Agriculture Organization, I think, from the United Nations, we try to basically predict whether there is going to be a food shortage in the country or not, which is very important for some countries, for most of the countries, by the way. Female, I mean, there is a gender gap in many countries, and basically that's a piece of work we've been doing with the Gates Foundation, and we try to expand it in some Asian countries like Bangladesh now. And basically the idea is, it's very simple, is to identify the women in the country. And identifying the women in the country is very important for many reasons. And one of that we need to basically include them in the economic system. They need to be part of the workforce. I mean, there are many studies from McKinsey and many others showing that having women, and the World Bank, having women participating more to the workforce will increase the GDP by a lot. So what do we need, and what are the challenges at this time of the, what are the challenges at this time? There are two things. Trust is very important, and economic sustainability is very important. Trust is very important because why do we have access to this data? These data are highly sensitive. But why do we have access? Because we have a track record and we know how to talk to the telecom operators. Satellite operators is much easier because it's a business already. It's established. I mean, there's nothing to talk about. But the telecom operators, it's very new for them to monetize the data. Same discussion with banks. We have the same discussion with banks. Do we have these kind of discussions in major markets? Yes, we have. Is it more difficult? Yes, it is much more difficult in major markets for many reasons. So to address some of the points that Alessandro addressed before during the question that he raised, 70% of the data are behind firewalls. The data that is generated on the internet, which means that the data that are behind firewalls are all your Gmail data or Facebook data or bank data, etc., etc. These data are highly valuable. So yes, the data from the private sector are highly valuable. Can it be open data? No, it's not going to be open data as such. I don't think it's going to be, frankly. But can we open it? Yes, we can open it, but we need to build an ecosystem that is economically sustainable. At this stage, where do we stand? We pilot a lot of use cases. Now we need to move from piloting to products. Is there a market for social good products? Yes, there is. Does it exist now? No, it doesn't exist. So that's why I was saying I don't care about IP and intellectual property now. I just don't care. I want to open my algorithms, that other people use the algorithms, they develop the products, that we set up like an ecosystem which is economically sustainable. That's what matters to me. So move into products. And there you can have like a product to basically improve the flows of cars in Kampala that's going to be implemented in Brussels, Paris, Bangladesh, and Brazil. That's really what we would like to achieve. Regulation, do we need to change regulation? Yes, sometimes we need to change a little bit of regulation. To be very open with you, in many emerging countries, regulation is very easy for me. Data providers, so far they are research partners. We need to make them economic partners. Telecom operators need to be economic partners to me. I mean, they need to be paid and remunerated for the data. Obviously, we can facilitate the openness of the data by saying, hey, you should open the data, but it's not going to be further than that. In terms of end users, having an ecosystem of end users is very important. So far, what is very, very difficult for me is to identify the potential end users around the globe. It's less and less difficult because there are marketplaces that exist, there are platforms and infrastructure that exist. One of them is the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, which has been very instrumental, but there are many others. So at this stage, and that is going to be my conclusion, we are building a market for data as well as a market for algorithms. And focusing on data is very important, but developing algorithms is as important to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederic. You touch some very interesting point. And I now ask Abayomi to I think that you will also touch the problem of the platform for access. You will also touch in your presentation the problem for the platforms to access car data, no? That will be also
definitely. Definitely. Thanks for the invitation, Abayomi Otubushin from BMW in the Brussels office. I'm a lobbyist. I wasn't always a lobbyist, I was an engineer for a long time, so thinking out of the box, anything is possible. Yeah? So today, I'm just going to give a short presentation of a new service that we have. We launched it on the 31st year, and it's called BMW Car Data. And the undertitle, Privacy, Transparency, Security in Connected Mobility. That's what we're really trying to achieve. So, on the first slide, you saw that we're 100 years old last year, and we want to see how we can get to be 200 years old, survive the next 100 years, and we have to continue the process that we started in 2007, from becoming a traditional car manufacturer to becoming a premium mobility services deliverer. And so part of this launch last year, we came up with the this is how we see the future of mobility. Due to all the different trends that are coming together, future mobility is going to be automated, connected, electrified, and shared. So that's how we see it. So automated to help smooth traffic flow, to give you time to do other things when your driver assistant takes over, and it increases productivity that way. Connected to optimize your routes, to maybe use less fuel. Early warning is ahead. Electrified for obvious reasons, for the CO2, but that's also a difficult and long discussion that we can have about that. But we are committed to electrifying our fleet, and shared. We also are very much involved in the shared mobility developing market. All of these rely on data and data handling, and BMW data is the next step to try and really use this data for a wider purpose. What I've got here is just a little bit of marketing. This is the 5 Series, but it shows all of the driver assistance systems that we have on board. Top view is shown below there, where you can see all 360 degrees around your car. Why do you want to do that? It could have been asked in 2007, why do you need a smartphone? Yeah, so it helps, and it will come a time when you say, oh, how did I ever get away without having that? So you have all these sensors around the car, you fuse them together, you get a 360 degree view around your car. And these sensors allow you to have increasing levels of automation. So the middle picture on the right is the remote parking, where you don't have to be in the car, and your car parks with your remote control. The top picture, you can just take it easy with maybe one hand on the steering wheel on the motorway, and the car will even overtake if necessary, if you set the speed. So these are things that are on the market now. In the bottom right, if you're approaching a junction and texting, and you don't react when a car pulls out in front of you, the car will brake automatically. So these things are available now. And there's lots of data collected by these sensors. So that will allow you to see up to about 200 millimeters. That's automated. So for the connected part, it allows you to see even further in kilometers. And we do this by gathering data from our extended vehicle back-end servers, publicly available data wherever from sources, digital maps, and feeding that into the vehicle so you can see if there are roadworks ahead suddenly, or if there's a traffic jam ahead, you get warning before you can actually see it. So this is the connected part of it. I'll skip over the electrified and shared today because we'll come up to the car data. What is BMW car data? It provides telematic data for customers and third parties. Yeah. With secure conditions, that's what's important. We had a lot of arguments about how to access cars data. I'll come back to that in a minute. This will then enable new innovative solutions for the customers. And the way we've implemented it, I think we're the first ones to do this, ensures the highest level of transparency. The customer knows who's getting their data and where, when. And there's the customers who decide who has access to the data generated by the vehicle. And we do this by an extended vehicle approach. This is what we call extended vehicle, because we didn't want to allow third parties to have direct access inside the vehicle. So we've been working with other people to develop an ISO standard, worldwide standard, on how this extended vehicle could look like. And basically, of ISO standards 20772, 2078, etc., which describe the design methodology, the web services, and the use cases and support. And with these set of standards, we believe that everybody can then, in a standardized way, provide vehicle data to third parties. If we could run the film now, I think it's a good way to show it. This is a film generated by the European Association. Have we got sound as well? Otherwise, it'll be a very boring film. Yeah, so it's very important for policymakers that the automotive industry speaks with one voice on such issues, and that involves a lot of argumentation internally beforehand, but we come up to this extended vehicle back-end as something that we can offer the policymakers. So the film is actually basically saying that data at home, there's lots of data around also for your vehicles, and we want to use that to optimize, as I said before, routing, roadworks or blockages, accidents, so you can get information in advance, or personalized services if your car needs a filter change or something and your third party has a chain of these services, a garage, they can warn you about that. So we need an infrastructure for this, a digital infrastructure, and we at BMW, we favor the pushing of 5G for this to make sure that we have very good coverage all over Europe for this. and that's been built as well. So we're also developing what we call LTEV, so so they can have vehicle-to-vehicle using cellular technology for this. So why didn't we want direct access to vehicle data in the vehicle? We have the liability with the vehicles. If anything goes wrong with the vehicle at all, regardless of who had the dongle or the application port, people will always look at us first. So we decided it was better to figure out a way that we can get data to parties, that we can still remain responsible for the data, because people will always expect us to be responsible for the data, but still create a marketplace for it and create maybe services for our customers that we couldn't offer. So it's based on a contract, consent, and we have to meet our legal obligations. And the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, was very useful in this. So I think we can stop the film there. So, oh yeah, direct access and off-board access I've talked about. So how does it work? It's free of charge for customers. So customers can request telematic data, the archive for their vehicle, they can see the data and manage the clearance process with a web interface for third parties who want to make them offers, like pay-as-you-drive insurance, for example, or things like this. For the third parties, it's a free setup and no monthly fee, and it's a cent-based price for downloading single telematics keys. And we try and limit, there's going to be a limit on the price that you can pay per month for a vehicle as well. So we're really trying to, while covering our costs, to make it attractive for services. And that is why the GDPR was very good, because it's very clear in this, and the car data is conformed to the GDPR requirements. So this is the data portability aspect. So we tried to be proactive before the legislation was there to see how we could actually do this. And this is the result. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. As you have seen, the last presentation is showing that some of the private sector data have already users, the user community, and policy are already defined with clear rules for access the data, including the cost. Has been raised also an issue about the fact that when a data provider knows about the value of the data, is increasing the cost. So one of the questions that I would like to ask to you is if you see in the future there will be a large user community, much larger than what you are expecting now, you will consider to increase eventually the cost of the data to make more revenues?
Well, it depends. Can you hear me? Is this okay? Yeah. Well, we have to be, as one part of the puzzle, if we say BMW data is more expensive than other data, that would not be very sustainable. I think the idea is to, our idea at the moment is to just try it and see. It might not work. We're not used to this type of thing. We're used to success, but we're going to try it and see what happens. We really do not know how it will develop. We just can't tell at the moment. The first 6 months have been good. We have a lot of interest, but we'll see how it develops. I don't think it would be worth to then just jack up the price.
I think that if you put this next slide, okay, these were the questions that I put at the beginning of the plenary. I have the impression that you answered the questions. You did a good job, thank you. And so I would like now to ask if somebody has some question for the panelists. Otherwise, I will ask a couple of additional questions before to close. I don't see and raising, so okay, I will go with my questions. One of the major issue that has been raised by most of you, that it is clear that data collected by the private sector and data collected by citizens are becoming more and more relevant. As far concerned the citizen, Frank made some suggestion about which are the means, the tools to increase availability and usability of the data, but which are the top priority? So what we need to do first now? So what you're expecting that, for example, from a European Commission perspective should be the first action?
That's a good question, of course. I think it's important, first of all, to recognize citizen data as a valuable addition to the existing data sets. Then there should be technical provisions making it more easy to include those data sets. And finally, and this is not as logical as it seems, but the European Union should very much state that European citizens are in fact allowed to collect their own data. This is not in all parts of the European Union, how to say it, self-explanatory. So I really think you should do that. Finally, I think to make it even more helpful, the public sector should open the data that it now closes. For example, data on mapping or data on cadasters. So it means the regulation or the register companies in the Netherlands, they're kind of closed still, and this holds for many countries, I think. So this is also something we could really use, especially mapping, because that allows to pinpoint the data on the right spots in the map.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a question about the policy for accessing private business sector data. In your presentation, Frederic, you are very clear, so the business sector have to make money from creating the data. And the same thing that was coming from the presentation of our colleague in the car, for car data. But you say that it would be nice to have a kind of framework that is in a way harmonized and identify which are the principles in the future to have this kind of license agreement, in order that should not be, as the Timo mentioned, the need ever to start a huge negotiation with individual private data providers. So if this is the case, do you have in mind some recommendation on how this framework should be shaped? And this question for you and also for Abayomi.
Yeah, question. So yes, I have some ideas about things that we could put in place very quickly, but I think we are very early stage, as you mentioned also for BMW. It's super early stage for everybody. I think testing innovative business model is still important at this stage. Frankly, I don't know, for instance, very stupidly, this morning I had a discussion with one of the United Nations agency on what should be the relation between us, the telecom operator, them, and some other potential end users. And we end up saying, frankly, we don't know. New. So we're going to test something. And so it means that we are still at a stage where what would be highly valuable is that we, European Commission, for instance, try to understand what are the key dimensions. Key dimensions is going to be very easy to map, I think. It's like what are the financial flows, what are the regulatory constraints, what are the contracts to put in place, what are the stakeholders. I mean, there are a few, maybe 10 dimensions. And then along these dimensions, maybe test a few things in a few countries. In some cases, we're going to test, hey, is it possible to make the data free and to send the data over to one of the party? In another context, we're going to test whether a third party should be the gatekeeper In another context, we're going to test, is there any place for a platform for algorithms or things like that? So you see, we still are, I think, very much at a testing phase, to be frank.
Abayomi?
Yes, for us, we had to listen very carefully to what our critics were saying, because our critics were saying, you're just sitting on all this data, you should just give it to us for free and allow us into your vehicles. And once you get over the negative defensive response that is automatic, you start to say, what is it that they'd like to do? What is it like to have? And we've made it very as transparent as we can and easy as we can. So a startup can just go to the portal and say, I want to be a third party and register. And if they get the consent of the people, then they can have the data. So we're then out of the picture. So I think that's a very good first step, and hope that we get positive feedback from that and go step by step.
Okay. Timo, you want to also add your view on what kind of measure that or action we can plan on?
Yes, I think I agree with Frederic anyway, that we are in a stage where we don't honestly know what we are supposed to do, and clarity of regulations that should apply also in other fields than mobile communication business. So my proposal for the first task would clarify the rules, perhaps we will need a new regulation putting some mandatory elements to use of the microdata, but that kind of things I would not consider technology or things like that as essential at this stage. We are able to solve the technical problems, but not the more political problems.
Sandro, can I add something?
Sure.
So you mentioned an element of infrastructure in your 4 questions that you ask us. I think having like a marketplace, like a platform, for exchanging algorithms to match between supply and demand of questions. For instance, if I have a question, I know that BMW has data. Frankly, I wouldn't know if we hadn't met. So you see, all the things, if we want to build a marketplace, are going to be important. And maybe it is a role for the EU Commission, because you focus on building infrastructure. I mean, that's one of the reasons. And nobody is going to build it because it's kind of a public good somehow. So.
No, this is a good point that came addressed in a couple of presentations in a different formulation. It is clear that the Commission is already engaged in provide the open data platforms, but this is only covering one part of the data landscape. It's not covering clearly the part of business sector data. My personal impression that there will be, in particular, for example, in the car sector, specific data platforms that are under discussion. Still don't know which will be the future, that if there will be separate data platform from different car producers, or there will be a common platform in which the different car producer can share some of the data. Because, for example, for application like the real traffic management system, we need data from all the car, but we need only data about the location. We don't need all the other vehicle data that are not important. So my impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this discussion is happening within the community, and the risk or the challenge is how the different community will go to solutions that will be interoperable in the future. Because the risk is that you agree on certain things, and you are already developing some standards that are perfect for these applications. But for example, imagine that another sector like the health sector will develop different standards. The energy sector will develop different standards. How we can combine in the future, even if we will be successful to have thematic platforms, how we can combine this information. So this is a big question for the future. If you have already an opinion, please share.
But I think it has to start with standardization in each of the sectors, and then at least you know, hopefully, what you're dealing with. If you want to aggregate or join these data sets together. What I didn't mention in my presentation was that this cooperation effect across sectors. I mean, we've announced in the last couple of years cooperations with Mobileye for the sensors, with Intel, and we're expanding this platform for the automatic driving and making it non-exclusive so that others can join in. I think the latest to join is Fiat. So we're moving towards this because the investment is just so that one manufacturer alone can't do it, or even two. So we're moving towards this shared platform where other aspects of mobility will differentiate the brands.
Okay, I think that we need to close the session now. I'm not sure that what you message you can have from this session. For me, it was very interesting because we have 5 completely different presentations. Each of them was touching some of the problems that we face for the future. I would say not only problems, but challenges. It is clear, if I have to wrap up, the key message from the session that in the future we cannot think about making decisions without considering data that are collected by citizens and by the private sectors. Clear that these data are becoming more and more relevant. It is also clear that the way to go to have all this data easily accessible for decision making is a long way. We have some area in which we have some already interesting example and progresses, but the way to arrive to a really interoperable public, private, and citizen framework is the challenge that we have to face for the next probably 10 years. And that could be the direction for inspire next generation. Thank you for your attention, for your patience to stay until the end of the plenary. I'm surprised. You are really resilient. And enjoy the gala dinner tonight.